This is Bloomberg Markets. I'm Vonnie Quinn in New York alongside Greg Bennell in Toronto. After nearly 3 months under a stay-at-home order, New York City begins reopening today. What resumes today under Phase 1? Construction, manufacturing and wholesale trade. Retail stores can offer in-store and curbside pickup as part of Phase 1. Joining us now to discuss is Retail, Wholesale and Department Store Union President Stuart Appelbaum. Stuart is also on Governor Cuomo's New York Forward Reopening Advisory Board, working to guide the state's reopening strategy. So, Stuart, I know that, for example, today you have a new reopening agreement with Macy's, a massive retail presence. It's not the new contract, which will eventually, hopefully, be agreed to by all parties, but it is the beginning. Explain to us the main provisions.
Well, good afternoon. I think that our members are excited about the possibility of starting to work again. But the top priority for them, and what should be the top priority for everybody, is safety. It's important that when we reopen, that workers and customers, the public as a whole, is able to remain safe. And that's what we've been seeking to negotiate with Macy's. We negotiated a reopening agreement for both Macy's in New York and Bloomingdale's in New York. And so we're pleased with that. We were able to include many of the provisions that workers are concerned about, especially provisions relating to face masks. Mm-hmm.
You made in these early, moves towards reopening New York City. Of course, it makes a lot of sense that we want to make sure that workers, that customers are safe. But I found it very interesting you talked about the retail workers themselves being safe getting back and forth to work because of the protests we've seen in the streets for racial equality, against police brutality. And you seem to have some real concerns there about the safety of retail workers being out in those streets.
I have concerns about safety, but not really about the protests. I think the protests, for the most part, have been peaceful. What we're concerned about is the way they get to work, the public transportation, New York subway system. We're concerned about whether or not they're going to have access to child care. And we're also concerned about racial justice, generally, that nobody has to worry about traveling to or from work or to or from shopping, about being confronted with violent police action of any kind.
Right. Well, one thing that jumped out at me in this reopening agreement, Stuart, is the so-called one-time pass. It's the idea that the colleague will be able to say no the first time they're called, but then they'll be put to the bottom of the seniority list and they don't get any other chances. They'll get the next call, and I guess at that point then they're laid off if they feel they can't come back. Is that correct?
Well, I think the pass was very, very important. A lot of people feel that they are not ready to go back to work and cannot go back to work because they may be in a highly vulnerable category. And we also know that retail has changed as a result of the pandemic, even when we reopen. A company like Macy's is not going to need to call all its employees back at once. There are going to be fewer people in the stores. Even when we get to another phase, there are going to be fewer people working in the stores as a result, because the hours are also going to be less than they were before. So it only makes sense. It only makes sense that if someone is not able to go back to work because they are highly vulnerable to this virus, that they should have the option of waiting before they go back. And that was something we negotiated with Macy's. We were afraid if someone said immediately that they would not be going back, that they would lose their job.
But is one time enough in terms of passes? I mean, nobody knows anything about this pandemic. Nobody knows if there's going to be another wave of infections. Nobody knows if there'll be a vaccine or how long it will last. Shouldn't unionized workers have the right to refuse a couple or maybe 3 times? What was the objection to that?
I think it's the next second pass before we go through the whole list of people eligible to go back to work. I also think if the question is going to be whether or not someone is ever going to be able to go back to work, then there are different discussions that are going to have to take place.
Stuart, one of the issues we're facing in Canada and we're trying to sort out between the federal government and all the provinces is sick pay. We do not want people going to work if they are sick, but people will go to work if it means losing out on a paycheck, not being able to put food on the table. How do you address that problem? That seems key to the public health aspect of this.
That's important. That's very important, not just for the workers, but for all people. You don't want people to feel any reason that they are compelled to go to work. You don't want people to say that, well, I don't really feel that bad and I really need the money, so I'm going to go to work. You need to discourage that attitude. And the way you do that is by making sure they don't feel compelled, that they'll have sick pay, that they'll be able to stay away from returning to work and possibly infecting their fellow workers and infecting customers, infecting anyone who happens to come through. You don't want that. It's not in the public interest. It's in the public interest to make sure that every worker has access to adequate paid time off if they're feeling sick.
All right, Stuart, this will be a piece-by-piece process. Thank you so much for your time today. Stuart Appelbaum, Retail, Wholesale and Department Store Union President.
Thank you, and thank you for talking about workers. We need to keep talking about workers and all of this and how we're going to keep working women and men safe.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much.
Absolutely, and it is absolutely our priority to keep talking employment.